Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Ardra Spark, also known as K.N.Fitzwater, also known as Katrina. Um, I normally do gaming on this channel, especially the big scary stuff. But today we are doing some book reading. I planned to do this on my author YouTube page, writing YouTube page. I'm not published yet. Um, and things kind of fell through. It was just hard to do a live stream on YouTube, especially when there's no audience there. So I know that easier to have an audience that will love to hear some spooky stuff from our dear Poe Boy. So I went on Twitch. Today I am dressed as a nurse, or at least a vet tech. This is my old vet tech scrubs that I used to wear in animal clinics and when I was going through my vet tech training. I almost lived half my whole life in scrubs, and just how the nurses and the doctors have been helping us throughout this whole crisis that our nation has been going through. I decided to just dress up as a nurse for today and tomorrow to show my appreciation and to say thank you for being superheroes. You are trying your best to save lives, and I know it's just so hard, especially with this political climate. You're human, you're doing the best you can, and we really appreciate you. We're going to try to stay safe this Halloween. I know that there's going to be some parents who's going to do some trick-or-treating, but I plan to do it as safely as possible. We're going to have gloves, we're going to have masks, we're going to toss the candy in our bag 6 feet apart. Everything's going to be sterilized, so the whole shebang. Just in case there are any parents doing trick-or-treating. That's if we're not canceling Halloween for trick-or-treating. So on the positive side, we're going to do this reading. Now this is a very old collection book that my mom had found, and you could tell how old and torn it is. You can see the old vintage, book coverings. You can see a little bit of the damage here, and you can kind of see that beautiful lion stand. It's hard to see it here, but on camera it really pops out. And this is the back side. And it's a little bit water worn. I know you guys love old books. They have character. I tried to save our books from water damage long time ago. Well, not long time ago, like a couple of years ago. Our basement had flooded and our books were there. Thankfully, this never had been damaged. It was damaged by other things. So that's this, and voila. Masterpieces of Mystery by Books Inc. And this is the clear type edition. And it's copyrighted 1936. It was copyrighted in 1936 by Gordon and Payne. So this is cool. This is a kind of a historical treasure of its own, and includes some things that we are familiar with. The Pit and the Pendulum, the Premature Burial, the Masque of Red Death, Avid Red Death, I'm sorry, the Adventure of Hans Fall, the Gold Bug, the Balloon Hoax, Von Kipling and his discovery, Mesmeric Revelation, all these other tales. So it does include the Telltale Heart. It does include the Masque of Montalado, the Black Cat, but it has other tales that is not really popular, that most people don't really hear about. So I would rather get through those unknowns after reading one of my favorites. Um, and I believe it's the Opal Painting here. I hope this is the right one, because I really like that one. I also love the Red Death, the Masque of Red Death. The current Reaper of Souls, the sequel, is loosely based on the Red Death. So it's one of my favorites. Ooh. Oh, so there's some really cool artifacts here, and like you see a little bit of that damage there. As you keep going, you can smell the vanilla. I love it. That really old pulpy smell. There's a little bit of artifact damage. Also, I should be wearing gloves, by the way, but I don't have the cloth gloves. So there's a little bit of spills, like there and over there. So you could see that there have been some mistreatment, ooh, and especially here. So it makes you wonder if it's blood or something. Or maybe it's just some really good coffee that accidentally got poured. Here we go. Oh, that's the Island of the Fae, which we will get to in a sec. Okay, so this will be a short one. Let me introduce my dear Blondie. She wasn't there. Alright, so she pranked at my door, so we'll just go on and do other things. Okay. Alrighty. Got my cocoa coffee. We're gonna get into it. The oval portrait. The chateau into which my valet had ventured to make forcible entrance, rather than permit me, in my desperately wounded condition, to pass a night in the open air, was one of those piles of humming lead gloom and grandeur which have so long frowned upon the Apennines, not less in fact than in the fancy of Mrs. Ragged. To all appearance, that have been temporarily and very lately abandoned. We established ourselves in one of the smallest and least sumptuously furnished apartments. It lay in the remote. I'm going to turn the music down just a tad. There we go. That's the nice spookiness I wanted. Sorry about that, guys. That was a little loud. We established ourselves in one of the smallest and least sumptuously furnished apartments. It lay in a remote turret of the building. Its decorations were rich, yet tattered and antique. Its halls were hung with tapestry and bedecked with manifold and multiform armorial trophies, together with an unusually great number of very spirited modern paintings in frames of rich golden arabesque. In these paintings which depended from the walls not only in their main surfaces, but in very many nooks which the bizarre architecture of the chateau rendered necessary. In these paintings, my antique. I'm sorry, it's been a while. In these paintings, my incipient delirium, perhaps, had caused me to take deep interest, so that I bade Pedro to close the heavy shutters of the room, since it was already night, to light the tongues of a tall candelabrum which stood by the head of my bed, and to throw open far wide the French curtains of black velvet which enveloped the bed itself. I wish all this done that I might resign myself, if not to sleep, at least alternately to the contemplation of these pictures, and the perusal of a small volume which had been found upon the pillow, and which purported to criticize and describe them. Long and long I read, and devoutly I gazed. Rapidly and gloriously the hours flew by, and the deep midnight came. The position of the candelabrum displeased me, and outreaching my hand with difficulty, rather than disturbing my slumbering valet, I placed it so as to throw its rays more fully on the book. But the action produced an effect altogether unanticipated. The rays of the numerous candles, for there were many, now fell within a niche of the room which had hitherto been thrown into deep shade by one of the bedposts. I thus saw, in vivid light, a picture all unnoticed before. It was the portrait of a young girl just ripening into womanhood. I glanced at the painting hurriedly and then closed my eyes. Why I did this was not at first apparent even to my own perception. But while my lids remained thus shut, I ran over my mind my reason for so shutting them. It was an impulsive movement to gain time for thought, to make sure that my vision had not deceived me, to calm and subdue my fancy for a more sober and more certain gaze. In a very few moments I again looked fixedly at the painting. That I now saw aright, I could not and would not doubt. With the first flashing of the candles upon the canvas, I seemed to dissipate the dreamy stupor which was stealing over my senses, and to start me once again into waking life. The portrait, I have already said, was that of a young girl. It was a mere head and shoulders, done in what is
Good grammar
technically.
and spelling are important. But if you want to write essays that inspire,
It said it had no commercials. What the heck? Sorry, everyone. There's only so much I can do with royalty-free music that's creepy. Sorry. There we go. The portrait, as I've already said, was that of a young girl. It was a mere head and shoulders, done what is technically termed a vignette manner, much in the style of the favorite heads of Sully. The arms, the bosom, and even the ends of the radiant hair melted imperceptibly into the vague yet deep shadow which formed the background of the whole. The frame was oval, richly gilded, and filigreed in mosaic. I'm sorry, I mispronounced that. That is Moresque. As a thing of art, nothing could be more admirable than the painting itself. But it could have been neither the execution of the work nor the immortal beauty of the countenance, which had so suddenly, so vehemently moved me. At least of all, it could have been that my fancy, shaken from its half-slept slumber, had mistaken the head for that of a living person. I saw at once that the peculiarities of the design, of the venting, and of the frame must have instantly dispelled such idea, must have prevented even its momentary entertainment. Thinking earnestly upon these points, I remained, for an hour perhaps, half sitting, half reclining, with my vision riveted upon the portrait. At length, satisfied with the true secret of its effect, I fell back within the bed. I found the spell of the picture in the absolute likeness of expression, which, at first startling, finally confounded, subdued, and appalled me. With deep and reverent awe, I replaced the candelabrum in its proper position. The cause of my deep agitation being thus shut from view, I sought eagerly the volume which discussed the paintings and their histories. Turning to the number which designated the oval portrait, I there read the vague and quaint words which followed. She was a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more lovely than full of glee. And evil was the hour when she saw, and loved, and wedded the painter. He, passionate, studious, austere, and having already a bride in his art; she, a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more lovely than full of glee, all light and smiles, and frolicsome as the young fawn, loving and cherishing all things, hating only the art which was her rival, dreading only the palette and brushes and other untoward instruments which deprived her of the countenance of her lover. It was thus a terrible thing for this lady to hear the painter speak of a desire to portray even his young bride. But she was humble and obedient, and sat meekly for many weeks in the dark high turret chamber, where the light dripped upon the pale canvas only from the overhead. But he, the painter, took glory in his work, which went on from hour to hour, from day to day. He was passionate and wild and moody man, who became lost in reverence, so that he would not see that the light which fell so ghastly in the lone turret withered the health and spirits of his bride, who pined visibly to all but him. Yet she smiled on and still on, uncomplainingly, because she saw that the painter, who had high renown, took a fervid and burning pleasure in his task, and wrought day and night to protect her who so loved him, yet who grew daily more dispirited and weak. And in sooth some who beheld the portrait spoke of his resemblance in low words, as of mighty marvel, and approved not less of the power of the painter than of his deep love for her, whom he depicted so surpassingly well. But at length, as the labor drew nearer to its conclusion, there were admitted none into the turret, for the painter had grown wild with the ardor of his work, and turned his eyes from the canvas rarely, even to regard the countenance of his wife. He would not see the tints which he spread upon the canvas, were drawn from the cheeks of her who sat beside him. And when many weeks had passed, and but little remained to do, save one brush upon the mouth, and one tint upon the eye, the spirit of the lady again flickered up as the flame within the socket of the lamp, and then the brush was given, and then the tint was placed, and for one moment The painter stood entranced before the work which he had wrought, but in the next, while he yet gazed, he grew tremulous and pallid and aghast, and cried with a loud voice, "This is indeed life itself!" and turned suddenly to regard his beloved. She is dead. So that is the oval portrait from Edgar Allan Poe. Hi, Yummy Rocks. How are you? We are doing readings from Edgar Allan Poe. This is a 1936 book printed by Books Inc. It's a really old book, as you can see here. And it's something that my mom found on her little wanderings all over the nation, and it's been stuck in our attic in the cupboard for ages. So we are diving into this. Oh, I'm glad you're good. I am doing okay. I am dressed as a nurse for Halloween. Even though it's like in the 40s outside, it's very nice and toasty with the thermal. I have my cocoa coffee. It's always nice to do a little bit of chat and keeping up with people. So that is one of my favorites, the oval painting from Edgar Allan Poe. I am going to do the next reading, The Masque of the Red Death. And there must be a way for me to put in subtitles what we're. Let me do a little bit of finagling if I can. Oh, can't. Oh, good. That's fine. I haven't read the Maze Runner books. I heard they're really good. And I think there was like 3 movies of those, right? It looked really good. Ah, but there's more. Okay. Well, that's cool. I've yet to gone around to it. As you can tell, behind me, I have some books I haven't read, and there's a bigger stack next to me, and I have some on my bed too, as you can tell, over there, including this. So I have a huge book list that I really had to go through. There are 5 in the series. Oh, that's not bad. That's good. That's good to know. I'm really hooked on R.S. Avatar when I was growing up, and I really love reading Dritz Jordan and his friends of the Hall, and saving, Faerun, one blade strike at a time. It's really cool. So I was really passionate about that, and I kind of fell out of it in a few years ago. So I'm trying to get back into it. He's done some more trilogies that I really should read up on. So I probably will add Maze Runner to my list. I think that's a really good series. I also need to catch up on V.E. Schwab's books. I heard those are good too, and I'm really need to look at those. She's quite imaginative, and I think that's very inspiring to give it a good read. Oh, and for anyone else, it's okay to let me know if the audio is weird, if the music is too loud. If something happens with a microphone, just let me know. I'm trying to get it all just right with the music. Okay, so Maze Runner, Scorched Trials, The Death Cure, The Kill Order, The Fever Code. I'm gonna write those down. But they all have Maze Runner, so it's not really hard to... I'm still gonna write that down. There we go, my handy dandy notebook. I'm like Captain America, you know, I'm lost forever in time, and I had to catch up on things. So hold on, we're gonna take a small break to write down Yummy Rock's titles. Maze Runner. Maze Runner. I'm such a slow writer. Oh, okay. No, I never got into his other books. I'm a small budding author of fantasy, and as I was writing, I really sheltered myself from what everyone else is doing. So I have a huge list to really catch up and see what everyone else is doing. I've yet to publish anything. It's all back end stuff right now. I meant to say writer, but I write novels. So that's what I meant to say. So I apologize. I don't have any books yet. Not yet. Okay. So yeah, I got the May series down. We're good. All right. I think one of these days I'll update my contacts to include my author stuff. Because I thought I'll just keep this as a gaming channel. But YouTube was being very difficult about streaming, and I needed a more attentive audience to, you know, read cool stories. So I'm glad I had this opportunity to read some stories to you. And he's one of my favorite authors. So now we're going to do The Masque of the Red Death. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, with a past band which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incident of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless, and Satis. Ah, no! I need to look this word up. This is an old word. It is Sagittarius. Sagittarius. I know it must be relevant to Sagittarius. Hold on. That would be a better way to say it. Hold on. We'll get this going. Sagacious. Okay, sagacious. So now we're gonna back up. But the Prince Prosperia was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers, and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of desire or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world will take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve, or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatores, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, and there was wine. All these in security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was towards the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prosperia entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slid back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case is very different, as might have expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor, which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber in which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The 7th apartment was closely shrouded in dark velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now in no one of the 7 apartments were there any lamp or candelabrum. Amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro, or depended from the roof, there was no light of any kind emanating from the lamp or candle within the suite of chambers, But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illumined the room, and thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar of a note and emphasis that, at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound. And thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconsort of the whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows, as if in confusion, reverie, or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled, as if at their own nervousness and falling, and made whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the last of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock. Then there were the same disconsort and tremulous and meditation as before. In spite of these things, it was a gay, magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were particular. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with a barbaric luster. There were some who would not have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed, in great part, the movable establishments of the seven chambers upon occasion for his great fear, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piccadilly and phantasm, much which has been seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as the madman fashions. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanted, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the seven chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams. And these, the dreams, wreathed in and about, taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon, there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then, for a moment, all is still, and all is silent save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and wreathe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many-tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the seven, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night was waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored flames, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls, and to him his foot falls upon the sable carpet. There comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal, more solemnly empathetic than any which reaches their ears, who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. Oh, hi, EB Gaming the Second. Hi. We are reading the Edgar Allan Poe The Masque of the Red Death, and we're right in the middle of it, so I hope you are enjoying it. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirlingly on, until at length there commenced the sound of midnight upon the clock. Then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more of the thought crept, with more of time, into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled. And thus, too, it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who have found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure, which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence has spread itself whisperingly alarm. There arose at length from the whole company a buzz, or murmur, expressive of disapprobation, surprise. Then finally, terror, of horror, of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefensible horror. There, there are chords in the heart of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally just, there are matters which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and the bearing of the stranger, neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse, that the closest scrutiny must have difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet, all of this might have endured, if not approved, by the mad revelers around. But the rumor had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince and Prospera fell upon the spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers. He was seen to be convulsed, and in the first moment with a strong shudder, whether of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares?" he demanded, hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him. "Who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, when we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who, at the moment, was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, moved closer to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe, with which the mad assumptions of the murmur had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that unimpeded he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage, and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon them all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped, gleaming upon the sable carpet, on which instantly afterward fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revellers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at the finding of the grave cerements and the corpse-like mask, of which they handled with so violent of rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now, as acknowledged the presence of the Red Death, he had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revellers in the blood-bedewed halls of the revel, and dead each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay, and the Red Death held illimitable domain over all. So that is The Masque of the Red Death. I loved it ever since I read it in high school. I love the colors and the symbolism of the colors and the revelers. I thought it was back then how weird, someone will lock themselves up away from the people with plague and, can't they just use their resources to help those who are sick instead of, parting away, so to speak. So, but now I know, dealing with 2020, I understood how relevant it is now. There are some of those who would use their means of wealth to escape from the horrors and leave everyone else behind, instead of using that wealth to do good, so to speak. So that is the Red Death. I'm going to take a small, thirsty break from the reading. All right, we're back for some more readings. I thank you for watching, even if it's a small part, and thank you for your patience and all the technical difficulties and the tongue twisters I had to experience. I haven't read these stories for more than a decade, and it's been a real treat to finally unearth it and read it to you. For those who weren't here in the very beginning of the stream, even though this is recorded, just for those who are in the middle of the stream, this is one of the older books. That's from the 1936 edition, copyrighted in 1936. So it's one of the older books. As you can see, the lovely looks here. It's supposed to be masterpieces of mystery. Poe's Masterpieces of Mystery by Edgar Allan Poe. So I have my D20. So we have 20 stories left to tell. And we only went through an hour in telling these stories. So let's try to see which is next. I may stream for another hour, but if you guys want me to continue, I'd be more than happy to. It's just going to be a very long upload to the stream, so let's go ahead and continue. Ooh, okay. So we're going to do the very end of the book, the very last story at the end, which is 20. There's 22 stories. We already read 2 of those. Oh, the Telltale Heart. So this is one of the good fun ones. Also came back and fill up my chocolate coffee. And I'm going to turn the music back down. I love the piano. I love this music. There we go. Okay. All I did is, it's kind of like a Poe Boy's chocolate or Poe Boy's mocha. All you do is take a tablespoon of powdered cocoa and you put it in your steaming hot coffee. And that's it. That's your Po' Boy's mocha. And with the Starbucks fall edition, that little tiny fall spice coffee that they do, it's not bad. It blends pretty well. Oh, right. If I ever get around to another camera or something like that, I will gladly showcase the pages because you can see the beautiful old text, a little bit of the artifacts. Actually, there's no artifacts on this one, but let me find some good ones here. Like there's some artifacts here. Some water damage. I mean, it's a really, really cool looking book. And I'm glad it survived for as long as it did. And yes, for those who love books, this does have a really nice vanilla smell to it. And it has a little bit of must. So this is one of the really good old printed ones. Alright, how am I going to get into this role? This is the mind of a madman, for those who wanted to know. Oh, this is a loud one. Yeah, loud. Okay. The Telltale Heart. True. Nervous. Very, very deadly nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am? The disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all the things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I made? Hearken and observe how heavily, how calmly I can tell you this whole story. It is impossible to say how the first idea entered my mind, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I have no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture. A pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of it, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it oh so gently. And then, when I made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head in through the opening, so far that I could see him lay upon his bed. What a madman would have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh, so cautiously, with a hedge's creak. I undid it just so much that a full thin ray fell upon the vulture's eye. And I did this for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight, but I found the eye always closed. And so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he passed the night. So you see, he would have been very profound, old man, indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I look upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than mine did. Never before that night I had felt the extent of my own powers, my sagacity. I would scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved in his bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no! His room was as black as pitch with a thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through the fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in, and I was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up at the bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still. I said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime, I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief, oh no! It was a low stifled sound that arose from the bottom of the soul, overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just as midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from within my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew that the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "'Tis nothing but the wind in the chimney." It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or a cricket, merely a cricket, which has made a single chirp. Yes, yes, he is trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found them all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a little, very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw with it a preferred distinctness, all a dull pale blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow of my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And now I have not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses. Now I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fear, as the beating of the drum stimulates this soldier into courage. And even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. Yet it grew louder, and it said louder every moment. Do you mark me? I have told you that I'm nervous, so I am. And now at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. And if for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once, and only once. And in an instant I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily and find the day so far done. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. Oh no. At length it ceased. The old man was dead, and I removed the bed and examined the corpse. As so. Yes, he is stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart, and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. Perhaps you would then know then. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, the arms, the legs. I then took up the 3 plates from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then placed the boat so so cunningly that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been so wary for that too. A blood had cut it off. When I had made an end at these labors, it was 4 o'clock. Still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart. Oh, what have I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play has been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what have I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search and search well. I led them, at length, to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secured, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I, myself, in the wild oddity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them I was singularly at ease. They sat, and when I answered them cheerily, they chatted familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale. I wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat, still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling. But it continued and gained definitiveness until at length I found the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale. I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. And yet the sound increased. And what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise still steadily increased. I rose and argued about trifles in a high key, with violent gestures, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? The floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to be feared the observation of men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder and louder and louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they had not? Almighty God, no, 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 they heard, they suspected, they knew. They knew they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this duration. I could bear these hypocritical smiles no longer. I thought I must scream or die. And now again, hark! Louder, louder, louder! Villains, I cried. Dissembled no more. I admit the deed. Tear at the planks. It is here. Here is the beating of his hideous heart. That is the tale at the Telltale Heart from Edgar Allan Poe. That was quite a acting bit for myself. It's kind of hard to get into the mindset of a madman of a mad serial killer. Oh, actually, no, just a plain murderer. I hope you enjoyed that one. That was a small favorite of mine. All right, so we're gonna roll for the next story. These are my D&D dice, my D20, and it rolled 20 again. So we're gonna try to roll for something other than 20. 9. There we go. Let's see what that is. Okay, so we're going to do the Tale of Scheherazade. I've never heard of this one. This is new to me. The sound... Well, maybe I should take a longer break to get into it. So we are going to read The 1002nd Tale of Scheherazade. And let's see if there's any cool artifacts in this. Oh, this is a long one. Ooh. Oh, this is a long one. This lasted... this is almost 20 pages. So what we're going to do is that I'm going to pause the recording. I'm going to hit stop for a second. I'm going to make this a part 2 of the recording. So the Tale of the Scheherazade is next. I hope you enjoyed the first 3 tales. We're going to continue into the Tale of Scheherazade shortly.